I may be right, I may be wrong, but I'm perfectly willing to swear that as you turned and smiled at me, a nightingale sang in Berkeley Square. I know 'cause I was there. I was 18 when war was declared. I'll never forget that day when the Prime Minister announced it. I remember feeling changed. Have you ever felt like that? The best way to describe it is that right up to the war, we tried to brush it off as if it wasn't real. We all knew it was possible that war could break out. It was at the back of our minds, nesting there where we hoped it couldn't hurt us. But you don't think about that sort of thing when you're that age.
We'd been going about our daily lives as always, going to work, going to the cinema, gossiping about who was courting who. People started to say, oh, politics, that's just something that happens in the newspapers. Slowly it becomes more real to you. The news becomes harder to brush off. They say, we might have to do this, but surely it might never happen. Suddenly the announcement came. Our lives were turned upside down.
Of course, if we'd known then how long the war was going to last for, we'd have been horrified.
Well, when this war ends, it will end, I suppose. It can't go on forever.
I was born and raised in Walthamstow with my mother and father, my younger brother Vic, and my little sister Patricia. I had a happy childhood, although we were never very well off for money. I was bright and loved learning.
Yes, I would like to go travelling around the world and meet some new people. Still, we did enjoy days out and a few holidays to Devon. This is me, aged 10, when we went to Hastings. And this is my parents in Brighton. It was one of our last trips before the Blitz got really bad.
When my mother was alive, she was of great comfort to me during those days. Father was just very sad. He'd fought in the First World War and remembered the horrific memories of that throughout his life.
Mother's been a great comfort to me during this time. Father's trying to keep his spirits up, but I can tell he's very sad. Must be the Great War coming back to him.
I suppose it first really hit me when the blackouts came. Everyone had to cover up their windows at night so the light wouldn't shine out, so when the enemy planes flew over they wouldn't see us.
The first night, I was walking down Lea Bridge Road after catching the trolley bus home from work. Not a tiny bit of light seeped out from the cracks in the curtains. It was pitch black, like an abyss of nothingness. I really struggled to make my way home.
When the war broke out, I was working at Negretti and Zambra, the optical equipment makers. That was a good company to work at, with a history going back almost 100 years. London's the perfect city to live in if you have a keen interest in history. I remember my bus going past Islington Green on the way to work and suddenly noticing that statue on the corner of it. What's his name? Hugh Middleton. And I made a note to go back and find out more about that man. From there, I learned a little more about London's history.
In times of crisis, it's jolly nice to walk through the city streets and just soak up the history. Soak up the feel of the streets, the lovely old buildings and statues. And sometimes you get one of those old plaques, that they put up for historic figures. I hope we don't lose too many more landmarks in the bombings, though.
In the beginning, so many of our friends and neighbours signed up for military service. Freddie and Sid, two local boys I'd known for years. They signed up for the Navy.
Life in January began to feel rather monotonous. By February, it started to soak in that How many of my friends were just no longer there, no longer on my doorstep to talk to or spend time with or just pop around for tea or go dancing. It's jolly hard not to spend time with your friends, don't you think? No more dances with the boys, no more popping round for a chat. I started to feel really quite lonely. I kept in touch with Freddie. He wrote me all the time. And as time went by, I started to fall in love with him. We used to talk about what we'd do when he came home. I began pining for him. Sid, on the other hand, I lost touch with. To be honest, I thought he was always rather an upstart.
1940 was the hardest year to get through. That's when the bombing started. The German planes were sent to attack targets across the country and then concentrated on London.
First you hear the sirens, like ghosts wailing from beyond the grave. And then you spring into action. As you hurry to the shelter, you hear the distant boom, boom, boom as the guns try to shoot down the planes. And then quiet. That tearing, rasping sound of the doodlebugs. And silence.
This went on for months, day after day, night after night.
Yes, it does get quite wearying, all these air raids. One time there was a raid that lasted for 8 hours and 17 minutes. Awful. Bombs, 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 and more bombs. The air was ablaze with searchlights, and a huge fire over East India Docks actually lit up the sky red. It was jolly exciting to see the fighting up in the sky, though.
It was all rather exciting to see, if you didn't count the human cost. Pilots in their planes, fighting to the death, firemen battling raging fires for hours. Piles of rubble and timber were lying in the street, and beneath it, human lives were lost.
It does get dashed tricky trying to get our day's work done, when at any moment we could have to run for the shelter. There's a vault beneath our offices, so the staff can shelter down there when there's a raid on. Sometimes we have to go twice a day, or more. The closest shave was one day when I was on my way home from work. A bomb dropped right on the street not far from me. I bet I looked so daft just standing there instead of falling flat to protect myself.
The worst times were when the air raids were at night. You could be settling down for a nice evening by the fire for an hour or two before bed. And then the air raids would start, and off you'd go to the shelter. Sometimes they'd go on all night. You'd been down there, hoping to goodness you might be able to get to bed for a few hours. And bombs could be dropping every minute. When I had time at night, I would knit and sew to send things to the local boys in the forces, like Freddie.
Unexploded bombs are a constant danger. One fell to the ground and managed to get beneath St. Paul's Cathedral. Imagine if that had exploded. Well, they couldn't disarm it, so they had to dig for 3 days to get the whole thing out. I'm glad they did, though. London wouldn't be the same without St. Paul's.
One day you could be chatting to a neighbour in their house, and the next day they could be dead.
Still, life has to go on, doesn't it? Can't let a war get our spirits down. I don't know how you like to keep your spirits up, but I'm rather partial to the theatre. Isn't London just the perfect city for theatre lovers? I used to go all the time before the war. It is sad to see theatres had to close, but we had to keep the spirit of theatre going at least. At lunchtime, the other office girls and I, we visit Samuel French and look at play scripts. We do enjoy reading and planning performances. We like William Shakespeare, Oscar Wilde, Noel Coward. Oh, now he's my favourite writer. I hear he's working on a new comedy, something about ghosts. I think he'll be opening it at the Piccadilly next year if he can. What else? Well, I do enjoy going to the pictures. It's the perfect pick-me-up for the spirits. My favourite is Tyrone Power. Oh, he was just marvellous as Jesse James, and I can't wait to see him play Zorro. Who else? Clark Gable, the King of Hollywood. I can't tell you how many times I've seen Gone with the Wind. And it seems so relevant now in these times. A whole civilization gone with the wind.
We did try to live our lives as best we could. We did worry a lot. After all, this war was a threat to the very existence of our world. Not just the deaths and destruction. I loved the history and culture of Britain. And I'd seen what the Nazis had done to their own. They rewrote history. They burned books and banned plays. If they got into our country, I fretted about all the wonderful books that they would destroy. That made me think about what Britain stood for and what we were fighting for.
Freddie wrote me all through his training at Chatham, and then when he'd been assigned to the HMS Whirlwind. Abel Seaman Hill. His mother was so proud of him. On my 18th birthday, I received 3 letters from Freddie, and the loveliest gold locket and chain. Of course, it had a picture of himself inside. Oh, I was so delighted.
Freddie was aboard the HMS Whirlwind when the ship was attacked. The crew fought back, but the ship was torpedoed and slowly began to sink. The captain was killed right away. Many crew were injured. They were able to keep going for several hours, but in the end the men had to abandon ship. When the official report came through, several men were singled out for bravery. I got the news about Freddie's death shortly after my 18th birthday. The bottom of my world had fallen out.
In the middle of dealing with my emotions, I received a letter from Sid asking me to write to him. I didn't know what to do at first. I was just so upset about Freddie. Eventually, I did write back. By September, I was writing to Sid regularly, and within a few months, well, we were engaged. When he comes home next, we'll be married. I do hope he comes home soon.
Sid and I have been married these past 30 years. He's still in the Merchant Navy. We get by quite well, with all life's ups and downs. We never spoke about the sinking of the ships, or the war. We were just glad it was finished.
I suppose war is a time to focus people's minds, to help them decide what's really important in life. That's certainly what it did for me.
And even in the worst times, life brings its little joys. The next year, the theatres reopened, and I got to see Noel Coward's ghost comedy. Stepping back into Piccadilly Theatre, it just felt like old times.
I suppose people like stories about ghosts because they show that death isn't the end. That your loved ones are still out there somewhere. I do think things will get better. I hope they do. Someday.
We've got to be strong and go on living, don't we?